I remember that day as if it had been etched into my skin. I needed just a small favor, $150, to cover an unexpected expense, and I thought my sister, of all people, might understand. I approached her cautiously, trying to keep my voice steady, reminding myself that it was a simple, reasonable request. I didn't ask for anything extravagant, just enough to get me through a rough spot. The moment the words left my mouth, I felt her eyes sharpen, as though she had been waiting for this chance to dismiss me. Her laugh cut through the room like ice, loud and deliberate, catching the attention of everyone nearby. I could feel every pair of eyes turn toward me, curiosity mingled with judgment. She didn't stop at a simple refusal. No, she mocked me, rolling her eyes and speaking as if my request was a crime. I tried to defend myself, my voice trembling. "It's just a small loan. I'll pay you back next week." But she smirked, waving her hand dismissively, and added, "Next week. You can barely keep track of your own bills. And now you want me to hand over money?" She paused, letting her words sink, and then delivered the final blow, a derisive laugh that echoed across the room. Friends and family looked on, some awkward, some trying not to smile at my discomfort. Even strangers passing by seemed to sense the tension, their glances sharp and uncomfortable. My cheeks burned, a mix of humiliation and fury rising inside me. I could feel my heart pound, a strange mix of anger and disbelief twisting inside me. Was this really happening? Was I always going to be the family joke, the one no one took seriously? Her words, her laughter, they weren't just insults. They were a declaration that I was invisible, unworthy, small. In that moment, the seed of anger was planted deep in me, and it took root almost instantly. I realized then that no one in my family would step in to defend me. The betrayal cut deeper than I expected, sharper than any reprimand from an outsider could. I left the room that day feeling smaller than ever, yet underneath that humiliation, a quiet, simmering determination began to form. By the time I closed the door behind me, I understood something crucial. This wasn't just about $150. It was about being seen, being respected, being acknowledged as someone whose worth mattered. And from that moment on, I promised myself I would never allow anyone, not even my own sister, to underestimate me again. That small request had ignited something far greater than the sum of money. It had ignited the fire of resolve that would change everything about the way I lived and the power I would eventually hold. As I walked away from that humiliating moment, my mind couldn't stop replaying a lifetime of being overlooked, dismissed, and quietly mocked. I remembered my birthdays, when my family's attention always went to someone else, my sister's elaborate parties, my cousin showered with gifts, while my own celebrations were reduced to a hastily baked cake and forced smiles. Every small slight felt like another brick in a wall separating me from the love and recognition I craved. I remembered sitting at the dinner table, offering help with chores or family projects, only to be ignored or met with a curt, "Do it yourself," each time. I swallowed my frustration, afraid of rocking the boat, afraid of being called dramatic. I flashed back to the times my opinions were dismissed at family gatherings. I would suggest an idea, and my sister or my parents would laugh as if I were speaking nonsense. I could see their faces now, smirking in that subtle, cruel way that made me question my own judgment. I remembered her always being the favorite, praised for everything, while I was the invisible one, struggling to prove myself. Even when I succeeded quietly, good grades, a promotion, or helping a relative, there was never acknowledgement, never pride, just the faint shrug that said, "Of course, you did that. What else is new?" The pattern repeated itself over and over, a subtle yet persistent echo of insignificance. I thought of family vacations where I felt like an outsider, being asked to take pictures, run errands, or watch my niece, while others were celebrated and doted on. I remembered the sting of comments disguised as jokes, "You're so sensitive," or "Stop worrying so much," when all I wanted was recognition and inclusion. Those words weren't harmless. They were dismissals, quiet reminders that I didn't matter as much as they did. All of these memories surged together, creating a tidal wave of emotion that left me simultaneously sad, angry, and determined. I understood why her mockery of my $150 request cut so deeply. It wasn't just money. It was the culmination of years of neglect, favoritism, and subtle cruelty. The audience should feel the weight of my invisibility, empathizing with the quiet pain and longing that had built up over time. This wasn't just a story of a single slight. It was a story of being unseen for years, and the quiet resilience that formed in response. Even as I processed these memories, a quiet voice inside me whispered that things would change, that the invisible me was only hidden temporarily, and that one day they would see the person I had always been underneath it all. That night, lying awake, I realized something fundamental. I would never allow anyone, not even my own sister, to dismiss me again. The humiliation I'd endured wasn't just a single moment, it was a pattern, a reflection of how my family had always underestimated me. I felt a quiet, burning determination settle into my chest, a promise to myself that my worth would no longer be invisible. I wouldn't retaliate recklessly. I would rise quietly, deliberately, and in a way they could never ignore. I began researching everything I could about finance, investments, and opportunities to build power and security. Late nights were spent poring over articles, analyzing stocks, reading about billionaires who had started with nothing, and mapping out strategies in notebooks I kept hidden. Each discovery fueled a sense of possibility and an intoxicating anticipation of transformation. I imagined the life I could create, the security I could earn, and the eventual moment when those who mocked me would realize how wrong they had been. I started small, testing ideas, making modest investments, and learning to leverage my intellect in ways I had never considered before. Every new skill, every small success, became a secret victory that strengthened my resolve. The FOMO I had long felt, the fear of being overlooked or excluded, shifted into motivation. I no longer wanted their approval. I wanted to surpass them in ways they couldn't comprehend, to rise silently while they remained blind to my progress. Status tension became my guide. I analyzed how people moved in social and financial hierarchies, understanding what it took to be noticed, respected, and feared. I visualized the future where my once dismissive family would encounter me not as the person they had mocked, but as someone they could neither ignore nor belittle. That vision, vivid and intoxicating, became my North Star. From that day forward, every decision I made, every hour I invested in learning and strategizing, carried the weight of purpose. I wasn't simply seeking wealth. I was cultivating power, patience, and intelligence that would allow me to rewrite the narrative of my life. And deep down, I knew that when the time came, their shock and disbelief would be the sweetest form of vindication. Over the next several months, then years, my life became a careful balance of secrecy and growth. Each morning, I woke before the world, dedicating hours to studying markets, reading financial reports, and learning every trick I could about investments. I experimented with small stocks, carefully tracked my progress, and celebrated every incremental gain in private, while my family carried on with their routines, mocking my cautious approach or dismissing my ambitions. I built a hidden empire. One decision at a time, I expanded my skills beyond finance, diving into entrepreneurship, technology, and personal branding. Every new skill became another tool, another opportunity to quietly assert control over my future. I took online courses, attended seminars, and read voraciously, letting knowledge compound like interest. I didn't flaunt my progress. I didn't need validation from anyone who had laughed at my $150 request. That humility was my camouflage, and it allowed me to advance without interference or scrutiny. The contrast between my hidden ascent and my family's ignorance became more pronounced with every passing year. While they assumed I was still struggling, still insignificant, I was quietly acquiring power, confidence, and financial leverage. I would meet them at family gatherings, listen to their jokes, nod politely, and masked the satisfaction swelling inside me. I reminded myself that patience was part of the strategy. Every laugh, every smirk at my perceived weakness became fuel for the ultimate payoff. My internal dialogue was constant, a running calculation of timing and opportunity. I asked myself, when is the right moment? How can I maximize the impact of what I've built? Each day, I answered those questions with patience, discipline, and a focus on the endgame. I allowed the slow burn of strategy to replace the immediacy of anger, knowing that a delayed triumph would be far more satisfying than any impulsive reaction. By the time the world or my family was ready to notice, I would be unrecognizable in both presence and power. That quiet ascent wasn't just about accumulating wealth. It was about shaping myself into someone they could never dismiss again. And every small, unseen success became a brick in the foundation of a future where I held all the cards, ready to deal them at the perfect moment. It was a mundane afternoon when it happened or casual scroll through social media, and suddenly her face appeared, laughing in a vacation photo with friends I barely knew. She looked exactly the same, confident, carefree, utterly unaware of how she had humiliated me years ago. My chest tightened as a memory of that $150 request flashed vividly. The smirk, the laughter, the way she had made me feel small in front of everyone. The anger I thought I had buried surfaced, hotter this time, sharper, fueled not just by that single moment, but by years of being dismissed. I sat back and observed her life unfolding online. Lavish dinners, weekend trips, and congratulatory messages from everyone around her. She thrived on attention, living as though the world revolved solely around her, completely blind to my quiet ascent. I imagined the conversations she must be having with friends, casually mocking people she thought she was better than, never realizing that one day the tables would turn. I whispered to myself under my breath, a mixture of fury and anticipation. You think I'm small. You think I'll never matter. Just wait. My mind raced, replaying her laugh, the words, the way she had relished my discomfort. Each detail added fuel to the fire, reminding me that patience alone wouldn't be enough. Timing and precision would be everything. Even as I clenched my fists, there was a strange satisfaction in knowing that I had already begun the work they would never see coming. I could feel the tension building, the story I had been quietly writing in the background about to collide with her reality. The audience should feel the simmering intensity, the mix of anger, focus, and anticipation as the protagonist prepares, in silence, to reclaim her power. That single image, that single memory, reminded me of the stakes. This wasn't just about wealth or status, it was about reclaiming dignity, respect, and the satisfaction of proving them all wrong in a way they would never forget. The countdown had begun, and I savored the inevitability of what was coming. I began turning my quiet ascent into a calculated plan for the ultimate payoff. Every decision I had made up to this point, the investments, the knowledge, the patience, was now a tool in orchestrating my revenge. I opened multiple accounts under different names, set up legal structures, and created layers of financial control that no one, not even my closest family, could trace. Every transaction, every asset acquisition was meticulously documented in my private files, each step bringing me closer to the moment when all their assumptions about me would shatter. I researched banks, institutions, and legal loopholes, studying how power could be wielded in silence. The thrill of knowledge, the awareness that I could manipulate systems they didn't even understand, gave me an almost tangible sense of power. I imagined the shock on their faces when the truth revealed itself, their disbelief mingling with and regret. FOMO, once my fear, had now transformed into a weapon. They would finally realize what they had dismissed for so long. I visualized the public revelation, carefully planning every detail to maximize impact. It wasn't just about money. It was about status, recognition, and moral victory. Each step in my preparations was deliberate, a small victory that strengthened my confidence and fueled my patience. The anticipation of karma, the poetic justice of their humiliation, and my vindication kept me focused, reminding me that timing and precision mattered more than impulsive anger. Every day, I reminded myself that this was about more than revenge. It was about proving, to them and to myself, that I had always been capable, intelligent, and worthy of respect. And as I plotted quietly, layering the mechanics of my eventual triumph, I felt an intoxicating mix of satisfaction and anticipation, knowing that the day of reckoning was approaching and it would be unforgettable. I had convinced myself the moment would come quietly, that I would pick a day, and everything would unfold like a slow, inevitable tide. Instead, it arrived wrapped in smallness of family barbecue at my parents' house that should have been forgettable. The yard smelled of charcoal and cheap perfume. Kids ran circles around the pool, and my sister, radiant in a dress that always seemed to demand attention, was regaling everyone with a story about her latest designer purchase. I settled into the background to listen, to observe, to be invisible in the way I had been trained to be. I had rehearsed nothing dramatic. My plan relied on precision, not spectacle. The first clue that this ordinary afternoon would turn was a careless comment my sister made, directed at me, but intended to be playful. "Oh look, if she's asking for money again, we should start a GoFundMe," she said, loud enough for several relatives to chime in with nervous chuckles. I felt the old prick of shame, the memory of the $150 slicing through like a fresh cut. Friends glanced between us, unsure whether to laugh or look away. My hands tightened around the plate until the napkin crumpled beneath my fingers, but outwardly I smiled and let the conversation slide. The public dismissal landed exactly where it always did on me. Later, while everyone crowded by the grill, my uncle started asking about financial news, interest rates, bank freezes, and someone mentioned a local branch with rumored troubles. It should have been small talk, but a tiny idea, planted like a seed, began to take root in my mind. I listened to the conversation with a calm that surprised me, cataloging names of institutions, murmuring details I had already studied. The irony that a casual mention of banks could feel like a bell tolling for what I had been preparing for was not lost on me. It was as if the universe had supplied me with the most mundane pretext. Then, as if fate were curious, my sister stepped away to take a call. She wandered toward the driveway, phone pressed to her ear, laughing, completely unaware of the calculations unfurling inside me. She looked so ordinary, sunlight in her hair, that careless confidence that used to sting me. Watching her, I felt a cold clarity. This was the moment when the careful house of cards I had built would intersect with the life she flaunted so carelessly, not with a shout, not with dramatic theatrics, but with a single, precise action in a place she would never expect. I moved through the rest of the afternoon like a ghost trained to mimic warm small talk, polite smells, the practiced neutral nods of someone who kept secrets. Inside, my pulse was steady, each beat a metronome counting down to an invisible zero. I made a few phone calls under the guise of asking about a vendor, checked an obscure ledger while pretending to watch the kids, and confirmed details I had rehearsed a dozen times alone. Every step was deliberate, and yet outwardly there was nothing to diagnose. I was the same quiet sister they had always ignored. As dusk painted the sky and guests began to drift away, a sliver of possibility hung in the air, a promise that what I had been building in silence could finally breathe. I knew the next move would have to be bold and clean, something that left no room for doubt or denial. The catalyst had come in the smallest form, a joke, a mention, a careless phone call. It was perfect. The stage was set, and I felt the thrill of the impending collision between my years of patience and the world's assumptions about me. Soon, everything I had planned would be visible to them, and their disbelief would be instantaneous. Truly, the day I had been preparing for arrived like a quiet storm, deceptively ordinary until the moment it struck. I walked into the bank with the same calm composure I had practiced in front of mirrors, in private, imagining every reaction, anticipating every possible hiccup. The teller greeted me politely, unaware of the storm about to unfold. I requested the withdrawal for $2 billion. The words left my mouth with the precision of a scalpel, each syllable slicing through the air as though nothing could touch the certainty behind them. The teller's smile faltered, her pen paused midair, and the world seemed to tilt slightly on its axis. At first, disbelief flickered in the teller's eyes, quickly spreading through the room. Managers appeared, murmuring into phones, faces paling, their fingers tapping rapidly across keyboards as if trying to undo the impossible. Phones rang, alerts pinged, and the quiet hum of the bank became a chaotic symphony of panic. Clients froze mid-step, staring at the unfolding scene, some whispering, some gasping. The air felt electric, charged with a mix of fear, astonishment, and the unspoken acknowledgement that something extraordinary had just occurred. Meanwhile, my family, watching from their ignorance, could scarcely process what was happening. My sister, once so smug, looked on with wide eyes, her mouth slightly open as if the air itself had betrayed her. My parents froze, disbelief etched into their features. The smug superiority they always carried replaced by confusion, a faint tremor of fear, and an inability to reconcile this reality with the person they thought I was. Every glance, every subtle gasp, every whispered question reinforced the contrast I had long imagined. Me, calm and deliberate, versus them, unraveling under the weight of their misjudgment. I felt no rush, no tremor of excitement, only the cold satisfaction of inevitability. Each step I had taken to reach this moment, the years of planning, the meticulous investments, the secret accounts, the quiet patience culminated in this single, undeniable act. It was not chaos for its own sake. It was controlled, precise, and unavoidable. Even as alarms rang softly in the background and employees whispered frantic reassurances, I moved with the grace of someone who had long known her own power and finally decided to reveal it. The tension in the room was palpable, thick enough to cut with a knife. Security personnel murmured to one another, clients whispered, and my family's faces reflected an intensity I had only imagined in private. In that moment, I realized how absolute the transformation had been, not in wealth alone, but in the balance of power, perception, and control. The very people who had mocked me, dismissed me, and underestimated me were now utterly unmoored, left to confront the reality they had never predicted. I felt an unspoken thrill at their astonishment, a quiet, controlled satisfaction that this moment would linger in their memories far longer than they could imagine. The moment the withdrawal hit, the bank erupted into controlled chaos. Alarms rang, red lights blinked, and managers dashed between counters, speaking urgently into phones, their voices rising over the low murmur of panicked clients. We need to verify this transaction immediately, one shouted, while another barked instructions to colleagues, the tension in their tone unmistakable. Customers leaned over desks, whispering, some recording videos on their phones, faces frozen with disbelief. Every glance toward me was a mixture of curiosity and awe, as though the room collectively recognized that something extraordinary had just occurred. My family's shock was even more pronounced. My sister clutched her purse, wide-eyed, muttering under her breath, that can't be real. She can't. She paused, swallowing, unable to finish the thought. My parents exchanged tense glances, their mouths opening and closing without words, as if searching for explanations that didn't exist. I don't understand. My father finally stammered. All these years, we never thought. The words trailed off, heavy with the weight of their realization. On us, clients whispered, some gasping audibly. A woman muttered, did she just withdraw billions? While a man muttered, no one can do that. Banks don't work like that. The tension was thick, almost tangible, each reaction amplifying the surreal nature of the moment. Phones were held up, security cameras blinked, and reporters had begun circling, alerted by the early signs of an extraordinary event. Amid the chaos, I remained calm, collected, my pulse steady. The contrast between their panic and my composure was intoxicating. I could see in their eyes that they finally understood they had underestimated me, dismissed me for years, and had no idea who I had become. Every whispered exclamation, every frozen face, every half-formed gasp was a confirmation of the power I had quietly accumulated. the justice I had orchestrated. Even as the bank's alarms continued, the media began calling, and security personnel tried to contain the unfolding drama. I felt a quiet, exhilarating satisfaction. This was more than money, it was recognition, vindication, and proof that patience, strategy, and intellect could overturn even a lifetime of assumptions. And in that charged, chaotic room, I allowed myself the smallest, calm smile, knowing they were seeing me exactly as I had always been. Underestimated, invisible, and finally unstoppable, I arranged the meeting deliberately, choosing a moment when the tension between us could be addressed without interruption. My sister answered the video call, her face a mixture of curiosity and residual panic, unaware of how carefully I had orchestrated this encounter. I could see her fingers trembling slightly as she gripped the edge of the table, and even through a screen, her arrogance seemed to waver under the weight of uncertainty. I allowed a pause before speaking, letting the silence stretch just long enough to make her feel the gravity of the moment. I imagine you're wondering how I managed it, I began, my voice calm, measured, as if recounting an ordinary day rather than delivering the culmination of years of planning. Her eyes widened, disbelief flickering across her features. It's simple, really, I continued. I studied, I worked quietly, and I made choices you never thought I could. Choices that didn't require validation from anyone who ever doubted me, including you. Her mouth opened, closed, and opened again, as if searching for words that wouldn't come. I let her sit in that discomfort for a moment longer, watching her process the enormity of what she had overlooked. Then I leaned slightly closer to the camera, my tone softening just enough to underline the moral weight behind my words. Do you remember when you laughed at me for asking $150? I asked, letting the memory hang in the air. Do you remember how you made me feel small, insignificant, unworthy? That moment wasn't just a joke. It was a reflection of how you've treated everyone you've underestimated. She swallowed, her eyes glistening with a mixture of regret and shock, and I allowed myself a subtle, controlled smile. I hope you understand now, I continued, that underestimating someone can have consequences far beyond what you ever imagined. I've grown in ways you couldn't see, and all those choices you dismissed, they led me here, to a position you never thought I could reach. The calm clarity in my voice, the steady gaze, and the quiet pride in my demeanor created a tension that made her squirm in her own consciousness. Facing her arrogance in the starkest terms. By the time the call ended, the catharsis was mutual. I had delivered my truth without rage or theatrics, yet every word carried the full weight of justice. She had seen the person I had become: intelligent, unstoppable, and morally untouchable. And I had, finally, allowed myself to savor the satisfaction that comes not from destruction, but from quiet triumph, moral clarity, and the fulfillment of every lesson she had once ignored. The aftermath of the withdrawal unfolded like a storm everyone could watch, but no one could control. Social media erupted with screenshots, whispers, and speculation, each post highlighting the audacity of what I had done. Friends, colleagues, and acquaintances of my sister began questioning her judgment, sharing subtle digs and incredulous comments. She really underestimated her own sister, one post read. How could she not see this coming? Every notification that popped up reinforced the contrast I had always envisioned. Her impulsive arrogance exposed, my measured strategy revealed. Family gatherings became tense and awkward. Relatives exchanged glances, whispered behind hands, and asked questions my sister could not answer. Her usual confidence faltered under scrutiny, her face paling when someone casually mentioned the bank freeze or the billions withdrawn. I noticed the subtle shifts. Invitations rescinded, polite distance maintained, respect being recalculated in real time. My presence, calm and composed, amplified the contrast. While she stammered, flushed with embarrassment, I observed quietly, serene and untouchable. Even casual acquaintances weighed in, relaying gossip that painted my sister as reckless, naive, and undeserving of the admiration she had previously enjoyed. Meanwhile, my reputation quietly solidified as someone capable, intelligent, and precise. The contrast between her impulsive mistakes and my deliberate, calculated actions could not have been starker. Every glance she received carried a tinge of judgment. Every whispered word a confirmation that her social standing had shifted irrevocably throughout it all. I maintained my composure, knowing the power of restraint. The humiliation I orchestrated was not loud or vindictive. It was precise, controlled, and undeniable. The satisfaction came not from cruelty, but from the recognition that years of patience, intelligence, and strategy had transformed me into someone that could neither ignore nor underestimate. My sister's fall, so publicly visible, was the ultimate testament to the contrast between the measured and the reckless, the underestimated and the unstoppable. Sitting alone that evening, I let myself breathe, finally allowing the weight of everything I had endured and achieved to settle. The humiliation, the years of being overlooked, the mockery, all of it had led me here, not to bitterness, but to clarity. I realized that my patience had been my greatest ally, that the years of quiet planning and disciplined growth had shaped me into someone who could command respect without raising her voice. I thought about how different the outcome would have been if I had acted impulsively, seeking instant revenge rather than letting strategy guide me. I reflected on the small moments that had fueled my determination: the $150 request, the dismissive laughs, the subtle favoritism that had stung more than any overt attack. Each slight had been a lesson, each setback a stepping stone toward understanding my own value. I felt a quiet pride in the discipline I had cultivated, the intelligence I had leveraged, and the moral victory I had achieved. This wasn't just about money or social standing. It was about reclaiming the dignity and recognition I had always deserved. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to fully appreciate the transformation. The person who had once been invisible, dismissed, and underestimated had become someone deliberate, confident, and powerful. I understood that real empowerment came from self-mastery and the quiet assurance that I had done what needed to be done, without sacrificing my integrity. The satisfaction was deep and lasting, a resonance of vindication that required no applause or approval from anyone else. As I looked back on the journey, I also felt compassion for those who had underestimated me, not because they deserved it, but because their failure had taught me resilience. The audience can feel this connection, sensing the empowerment that comes from enduring injustice, cultivating patience, and achieving a triumph that is both strategic and morally sound. I had grown in ways they could never have predicted, and the emotional weight of that growth was finally mine to savor. In the weeks that followed, I embraced the life I had quietly built, enjoying the freedom, wealth, and recognition that had once seemed impossible. The thrill of financial power, the satisfaction of seeing my sister's arrogance humbled, and the respect I now commanded were intoxicating, but they were tempered by a sober awareness of what it had cost. Family gatherings no longer carried the sting of exclusion, but the absence of genuine connection reminded me that some wounds could never fully heal. I had gained everything in terms of power and justice, yet the emotional scars from years of betrayal remained, subtle and persistent beneath the surface. I moved through my days with a calm confidence, no longer chasing validation from those who had undervalued me. Friends and colleagues noticed the transformation: how composed I was, how deliberate in my decisions, and how quietly influential my presence had become. Even small achievements brought satisfaction, because I knew they were earned through patience, intelligence, and strategy, rather than relying on others' approval. Yet, when I reflected on family, I felt a twinge of melancholy. The people who had caused so much pain were still my relatives, and some connections could not be repaired by revenge alone. There were moments of quiet contemplation when I allowed myself to think about what I had endured, the betrayals, the dismissals, the endless belittling that shaped my earlier self. Those memories reminded me that empowerment often comes with cost, and that triumph, while sweet, is rarely pure. But I also recognized my growth, the inner strength, the clarity, and the resilience I had cultivated along the way. These were gifts no amount of ridicule or family toxicity could ever take from me. As I looked ahead, I understood that my life would continue, rich with opportunities and successes, but forever shaped by the lessons of the past. The audience is left with a bittersweet reflection. Revenge complete, justice served. Yet the emotional landscape remains nuanced, acknowledging that empowerment and pain can coexist. I had won, undeniably, but the scars reminded me of everything I had survived and everything I had become because of it. Years later, I sometimes think about how small moments can shape an entire life. A laugh, a dismissive comment, a trivial act of arrogance, any of them can plant seeds that grow into lessons, or, if ignored, into consequences. My story is proof that underestimating someone can carry costs far beyond what the moment suggests. Those who dismiss, mock, or belittle may believe their actions are harmless, but the universe or life itself has ways of balancing skills, often quietly and without warning. I've learned that true power doesn't come from lashing out or seeking immediate revenge. It comes from patience, strategy, and the quiet cultivation of skill and resilience. Karma, in its most satisfying form, often arrives without spectacle, yet its impact is unmistakable. My sister's arrogance, my family's assumptions, their blind confidence in their superiority, they all met consequences shaped by my deliberate actions. The takeaway is simple: respect others, even those who seem insignificant, for their potential is often far greater than appearances suggest. And for those who, like me, have been underestimated or dismissed, remember that patience, intelligence, and moral clarity can become the most powerful instruments of vindication. Life has a way of revealing the true measure of people, and when the scales tip, the results are unforgettable.